Bismillah, Alhamdulillah, Assalatu wassalam ala Rasulillah. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, dear students. Welcome again to another lesson. Today we will be covering two topics. The first one is deviation concerning the names and attributes of Allah. The second one is about fasting. We will continue to other portions, other parts of fasting from the last time. So the first topic, deviation concerning Tawheed Al-Asmaa Was-Sifaat, deviation concerning the names and attributes of Allah. Now before we go further, I want to do a recap and a bit of a refresher on what we covered in the last lesson relating to the names and attributes of Allah. You may recall that these names and attributes, what they refer to the nature of God, the essence of God. And it's a topic where human beings have made a lot of mistakes and have described God in a way that is not befitting Allah and His Majesty. I also discussed that why we cannot understand the nature of God just using our limited knowledge and capabilities. Normally, human beings understand things by their senses and their perception. Senses being hearing, touching, seeing, tasting. But none of these physical senses allow us to sense God, right? So we can't see God, we can't feel God, touch God, etc. So we can't, our physical senses do not allow us to understand the nature of God. And then even our perception. So the other thing that human beings use to understand things that they don't necessarily have any physical sense about is using perception. But perception again relies upon your memories, your past experiences, and your feelings. But none of these things come close to understanding God. So typically human beings have gone astray when using their limited knowledge and human faculties to understand God. So because of this, we do not have the mental capacity to even imagine God. Like I mentioned, we can't even see God, you can't even feel God, you can't even hear God. So to try and use your perception, to use your senses, will lead to the wrong conclusions of God. We do not have the mental capacity to even imagine God. So then the question is, how do we understand the nature of God? Allah has actually given us knowledge about Himself through revelation, through the Quran and Sunnah, where in the Quran, Allah affirms His attributes, right? He tells us about His qualities. We also know about Allah's qualities, His names and attributes, through the prophetic narrations. So these two sources, they are more than enough for us to understand the nature of God. And these are the only sources that we can rely on to understand the nature of God, to know Allah's qualities, names and attributes. We cannot use any other sources. The other point to note here is that the qualities, the names and attributes of Allah that are mentioned in the Quran and Sunnah, it is our duty as Muslims to accept them, to submit fully to the lofty names and attributes of Allah that have been stated in the authentic text. The other duty as a believer is that when it comes to these names and attributes, we accept them, we submit to them without distorting them, without denying them, without explaining them or likening God to any of His creation. So such as we know one of the names of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is As-Sami'. He is the hearing. The other name of Allah is He is Al-Basir. He is the seeing. We accept and submit to these names in the sense that we accept that Allah is the all-hearing, the all-seeing. But we also have to understand here that the names and qualities that belong to Allah, we must understand them in the most absolute and perfect form. So Allah is not just hearing, He is the all-hearing, He is the all-seeing. Why? Because Allah, He is the creator of the universe and everything inside the universe. So we can infer that the creator is he is beyond his creation. So any qualities that the creator has, they cannot be understood in the same way as the qualities of human beings. So yes, we do share the names that have been used to describe those qualities. So yeah, we see as Allah sees, but Allah's seeing is absolute. It is perfect. That's one thing. The second thing is that we do not go into and trying to interpret the meaning of these names and attributes. So we do not go into the questions, how does Allah see? How does Allah hear? All we say is that Allah is all-seeing and all-hearing in a manner, right, that is befitting Allah's majesty and His greatness. Because going back to what I said before, there is no point in trying to go into the meanings of this. The only thing you need to realize is that the only similarities between Allah's qualities that He's mentioned in the Quran and Sunnah and our qualities is that we only share the words that are used to describe those qualities, but not the meaning. The meaning, like I said, the meaning of how Allah sees, that is, we say laysa kamithlihi shay wa huwa as-sami'ul basir. There is nothing like unto Him, and He is the hearing and the seeing. Allah hears and sees in a manner befitting His majesty and His greatness. So these were some of the key principles that I discussed in the last lesson, and I wanted to remind you of them as we discuss this topic. So how is Tawheed related to the beautiful names and attributes of Allah? I needed to change the headings, I didn't, but this slide refers to the types of deviation that occurs concerning Allah's names and attributes. So the scholars give a name to when people deviate from Allah's names and attributes as they should be understood. This is known as Ilhad. Ilhad is the name given by scholars to describe deviation concerning the names and attributes of Allah, the Mighty and Majestic. And this Ilhad can also be translated as heresy or deviation. Now Allah has condemned deviation concerning His names and attributes and commanded the believers to forsake both ilhad and those who practice it. Now, like I mentioned before, that as Muslims we are not allowed to understand Allah's names and attributes except the way that we have been taught to understand it in the Quran and Sunnah. If we deviate from that understanding, then this is going astray, this is sinful. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala even mentions in the Quran, so this is how important and how dangerous it is to deviate from the understanding of the names and attributes of Allah. Allah says in the Quran, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, وَلِلَّهِ الْأَسْمَاءُ الْحُسْنَى فَادْعُوهُ بِهَا وَذَرُوا الَّذِينَ يُلْحِدُونَ فِي أَسْمَائِهِ سَيُجْزَوْنَ مَا كَانُوا يَعْمَلُونَ. And to Allah belongs the best names, so invoke Him by them and leave the company of those who practice deviation concerning His names. They will be recompensed for what they have been doing. So anyone who does not maintain the Tawheed of Allah concerning His names and attributes, meaning that they do not uphold the names and attributes that Allah mentions and affirms for Himself in the Quran and Sunnah, then that person has gone astray and he has earned the wrath of Allah. So it's very important for us to understand the nature of God, the qualities of God from the Quran and Sunnah, and not deviate from that. As a deviation from that, Allah has given us a stern warning against that. The next slide, deviance and heresy concerning Allah's names and attributes occur in several different forms. So ilhad, which we said, refers to deviating from the understanding of the names and attributes of Allah, but these occur in different forms, and I will be covering five different forms in which this happens. So the first heresy, ilhad, of the Arab, it was of the Arab idolaters, right, who used the names of Allah to refer to their idols and objects of worship. They would derive names of their idols from the names of Allah. So the mushrikeen of Mecca, right, they used to have a lot of idols, and they used to place these idols around the Kaaba at that time. And two of the greatest idols were Al-Lat and Al-Uzza. So Al-Lat, right, actually comes from the Arabic word Ilah, which means God, and Al-Uzza comes from the Arabic word Al-Aziz, which means the Almighty. So why is this wrong? This is wrong because the Arab idolaters, they attributed the qualities, right, that belong exclusively to Allah and gave it to these idols. They took away the right of Allah that only He alone deserves to be worshipped without any partners. So they took the qualities of Allah that belong solely to Him, they gave it to these idols, and not only that, they took the right of Allah that only He alone deserves to be worshipped. This is a grave sin. And just to just to highlight how bad this is, imagine imagine there's this righteous, generous, and merciful king who's done so much for his kingdom and his people and his followers, and in return all he expects is that his followers, his subjects, they come to him and they pay him gratitude. They give him some kind words. So all they have to do is they go to the king and say, "Thank you, O Majesty." But instead of these followers showing their gratitude to the king, right, the king who has given them so much favor, has done such a good job to the kingdom, instead of going to the king and showing gratitude to the king, these people, they go to some random person and they say, actually, no, thank you for all that you've done, O my Majesty. So two things here: they show gratitude to the wrong person, and secondly, they give the name an attribute that belonged to the king, and they gave it to someone else who's not deserving of it. So just to give you an example of how bad this was. So this is what the Arab idolaters used to do, and this is why they were deserving of the punishment of Allah, because they went astray. The second heresy, heresy of those who liken the attributes of Allah to those of His creation, that have failed to, and the reason why this is going astray, the reason why this is a form of heresy, is that they fail to recognize the magnificence of Allah, that is unlike any of His creation. And we covered this previously. When people use their limited knowledge and capabilities, they end up perceiving God in their own image, and this is unacceptable, because, like I mentioned before, the one who created this universe and everything in it cannot be like His creation. He has to be above, exalted, beyond His creation. And by likening God and giving Him human qualities is not maintaining the Tawheed of Allah. It is not worshipping Allah in the right way. The other forms of heresy include heresy of those who reject Allah's names and attributes outright. This form can be divided into two. Those who generally affirm the existence of Allah's names and attributes, while they reject the meaning of what each name represents. So, for example, they say that Allah is Al-Alim without being knowledgeable, just as He is Al-Basir but without sight. But those, in the second category, underneath this, is those who explicitly reject the names of Allah and what each name represents. It is as though Allah does not exist. So remember, we said that as believers, right, who love Allah and follow His orders, we must accept and submit concerning His names and attributes, which means that we do not deny, reject, distort, or try to explain the names and attributes, or even try to liken Allah to His creation. we say that as far as meanings go, it is befitting Allah's greatness and majesty, that there is nothing like unto him, and he is the all-hearing and the all-seeing. So remember also I said that the words, that the qualities that we share, we only share in terms of the words. We do not share the meaning. When it comes to the meaning, we fall back on the principle that is mentioned in the Quran. Allah mentioned in the Quran in Surah Shura, لَيْسَ كَمِثْلِهِ شَيْءٌ وَهُوَ السَّمِيعُ الْبَصِيرُ. There is nothing like unto Allah. There's nothing like unto Allah. And the meaning is in a way that is befitting Allah's greatness and majesty. We leave it at that. We do not go into the details, right? But these groups of people that I mentioned here, obviously they have gone astray because they've done the opposite of what we mentioned. They've actually, so they affirm that the existence, so they affirm the words, they affirm the qualities of all those names and attributes, but they reject the meaning. We do not need to go into those, and this is why it's dangerous to use your limited human faculties and knowledge to try and understand the nature of God. We say, لَيْسَ كَمِثْلِهِ شَيْءٌ وَهُوَ السَّمِيعُ الْعَلِيمُ. The same applies to those who explicitly reject the names of Allah, what each name represents. This is even more dangerous and more deserving of Allah's punishment. The fourth category of heresy, of deviating from the Tawheed of Allah's names and attributes, is heresy of those who describe Allah with inappropriate names. Example, the use of the word Father to refer to Allah. And again here, right, there is no need for us to describe Allah with qualities or with names that Allah has not affirmed for himself in the Quran, or the Prophet has not told us in the Hadith. There is no need for us. It is sufficient for us as believers to call Allah, to call upon Allah, to invoke Allah by the names and attributes that Allah has affirmed for himself in the Quran and the Sunnah, Ar-Rahman, Ar-Rahim, etc. Because the danger here is that you could use a term that is inappropriate. It is not befitting Allah's name, His majesty and His greatness. And you can again go back to the example that I gave of the king and versus his subjects, his followers. The king wants to be referred to by particular names. Oh my majesty, and he is well within his right to be called with the names that he feels that are good. Imagine if one of his followers calls him by a name that is inappropriate, the king would be unhappy, right? So that's one way of thinking about it. The last category of heresy and how it relates to deviating with the names and attributes of Allah is those who describe Allah in a manner that shows deficiency. Example, after Allah created the heavens and the earth, He rested. This is a concept that is present in one of the Abrahamic religions. Quite clearly here, we are attributing human-like qualities of tiredness, of fatigue. But again, our understanding of God is that God is all-powerful, all-knowledgeable. He's omnipotent. He does not need sleep, right? So when we attribute these types of names or concepts, we are actually showing deficiency in Allah's qualities, which, like I said before, all the qualities of Allah must be understood in the most perfect and absolute form. And the other danger here is that you are reducing Allah to be like the creation. Creation, yes, we get tired, we sleep, but Allah does not. Allah is exalted and beyond what people falsely attribute to Him. Okay, so that covers the first portion of this lesson. So hopefully now you should be able to either go through the book itself, Islamic Studies Students Textbook, or these lessons, and you should be able to know what the term ilhad means, and also mention some of the ways that people have committed ilhad. Okay, so the next lesson from the Islamic Essentials is Chapter 3 on fasting continued. Last time we covered a few topics in relation to fasting, and in this lesson we'll be continuing forward. So this will cover 3 sections. Section on beginning and end of the month of Ramadan, upon whom is fasting of Ramadan compulsory. And last one, people who are excused from fasting during Ramadan. So section 4, beginning and end of the month of Ramadan. So how do Muslims confirm the beginning of the month of Ramadan? In the prophetic tradition, the Prophet of Allah ﷺ has given us a process by which we can confirm the beginning of the month of Ramadan. The Prophet of Allah ﷺ in various hadith has mentioned that Ramadan is considered to have commenced when two Muslims or one sight the crescent of the month of Ramadan. So now remember, the Islamic calendar is based on a lunar calendar. So each month is determined by the cycle of the moon. And each month is, so because of that, each month is 29 or 30 days. So at the end of the 29th day, so just before the sunset, two Muslims or even one Muslim, they go out to sight the crescent of the month of Ramadan. If they're able to sight the crescent of the month of Ramadan, they go and testify to the leader of the community, a local leader or leader of the region or a country. They go there and they say to the leader that, we, so-and-so, we have seen the crescent of the month of Ramadan. And if the leader accepts their testimony, then he'll declare the commencement of the fasting month, the month of Ramadan. However, so if at the end of the 29th day, right, just before the sunset, the sky is cloudy, it's overcast, and we're not able to see the moon. The moon cannot be sighted. So what happens in this case? So even in this situation, we have the Sunnah here, as we're told in the prophetic hadith. The Prophet of Allah ﷺ, he instructs Muslims to complete the full 30 days, and the day after that is considered to be the first month and the first day of the month of Ramadan. So at the end of the 29th day, the sun sets, but people cannot see the moon because it's cloudy. Then what happens is that we complete the 30 days of Shaban, because the month before Ramadan is Shaban. So if after the end of the 29th day, after sunset, it's cloudy, we cannot see the moon, we complete the full 30 days of Shaban. And then the day after next becomes the first day of Ramadan. Okay, next, so how do Muslims confirm the end of the month of Ramadan? So this is a bit repetitive. It's similar to how we begin the month of Ramadan, because remember I said that the Islamic calendar is a lunar calendar. We follow lunar months. So the beginning and end of month is determined by the moon cycles, and that is about 29 to 30 days. So similarly, just like with Shaban, at the end of the 29th day, we go out to see the crescent, and if the crescent is there, the following day is the first month of Ramadan. Similarly with Ramadan, at the end of the 29th day of Ramadan, we go out to sight the crescent of the next month, the crescent of Shawwal. And if we can see, and if someone sights, in this case, we need two Muslim witnesses. If two Muslim witnesses can sight the crescent of Shawwal after the end of the 29th day of Ramadan, and they testify this to the Muslim leader accepts the testimony, then he declares, and how exciting will this be for us as well, he declares the end of Ramadan and the first day of the next month as the day of Eid al-Fitr. So the next day would become the Eid al-Fitr, and we would go, and normally speaking, obviously right now we're in a lockdown, normally speaking, then we would be preparing for Eid, getting our clothes ready, and getting prepared to go for Eid Salah. But however, in the same situation, if the sky is overcast at the end of the 29th day of Ramadan, if the sky is overcast, the moon is not possible to be sighted, then Muslims, as I said before, which is the Sunnah, Muslims are required to complete the previous month, the full 30 days, and consider the next day after, so not the next day, the day after, the 1st of Shawwal, and it is the first day of Eid, and it's Eid al-Fitr. Okay, section 5. Upon whom is fasting in Ramadan compulsory? So fasting is compulsory on every Muslim male or female who is an adult. So remember, I did talk about what are the conditions that need to be met for someone to have reached the age of puberty. So we said that there are some signs of puberty that need to have occurred. If they haven't occurred by the age of 15, then the person is considered to be an adult. But anyway, the fasting is compulsory on every Muslim male or female who is an adult and is of sane mind at the time of fasting. One particular point to note here is that if you have not reached the age of puberty, if you're not baligh, so you have not seen the signs of puberty, you've not reached the age of 15 years old, this is solar years, so it would be, I think, 14 and in some days in the lunar calendar. If you have not seen any signs of puberty and you're less than the age of 15, you should still be fasting, A, to get into the practice of fasting, but B, it is highly rewarding, right? You may not be obligated, so you may not be responsible, morally responsible to carry out, but you should still fast because it is highly rewarding. Because rewarding but not compulsory for children that are less than the age of puberty but are of the age of discretion. So you would, if you're beyond the age of 7, 8, you would be considered at the age of discretion, where you can comprehend what is good, what is bad, you can comprehend life, etc. Section 6. People who are excused from fasting during Ramadan. So we talked about the groups of people that fasting is compulsory upon. So if you're a Muslim, you're an adult, you're sane, etc. But there are certain groups of people who are excused from fasting a day or more in Ramadan while the excuse exists, right? So I've given two groups here. So if the month of Ramadan has commenced and you are a traveler or you are a sick person, then while you are traveling or while you are sick, so while this condition persists, this exists, you have been permitted, you've been given a concession. You can either fast, or if you prefer not to fast, you have the option to not fast while this condition exists. So if you're traveling, for as long as you're traveling, you have the option, you have been permitted to not fast. If you're sick, you've been given the option, you're permitted not to fast while you are sick. But there is a catch though, because this, as long as this condition is temporary, so for the sick person, if you're not terminally ill, or if you're not old such that you're so old that it is actually harmful for you to fast, right? Those people, we're not talking about them, we're talking about a physical sickness that is temporary. So once this sickness disappears and you become healed, then you do need to make up those fasts. After Ramadan, you have to make up those fasts, the missed fast. And making up those missed fasts is called qada. So if in Ramadan you're a traveler and you're a sick person and your sickness was temporary, then you have to make up those missed fasts after Ramadan, and this is known as qada. Okay? Well, this wraps up our lesson on fasting. So you should be able to, after this lesson, tell your parents, how do Muslims confirm the beginning of the month of Ramadan? And I really want you to get into this. And how do Muslims confirm the end of Ramadan? What I mean is, getting into this is really get interested in understanding the celestial bodies, the universe, astronomy. Maybe at the end of the 29th day of Ramadan, maybe you and your family grab a telescope, or at least just go out to a spot where you can see the horizon clearly, and hopefully it's not overcast. And I want you to try and sight the crescent. And there's some du'as that you can also recite at the time of sighting the moon. So it will be a nice activity, and you'll also be upholding the sunnah of sighting the crescent with the naked eye. So you should be able to tell me and your parents, how do Muslims confirm the beginning of the month of Ramadan and how they confirm the end of Ramadan. You should also be able to tell us upon whom is fasting in Ramadan compulsory.